Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much indeed for attending the Virtual Planning and Development Management Committee today, the 23rd of September. And thank you to anyone who is who's decided to watch us remotely, and you are most welcome. We have some apologies this morning. So we have apologies from Councillor Reid, Councillor Waters and Councillor Williamson. Danny, I believe we have substitutes.
Yes, convener, we have Councillor McEwen substituting today for Councillor Waters.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. I am going to do as I normally do, which is introduce the top table. This is obviously virtual now, but I'm introducing the officers that are here to answer any questions. We have Mr. Christian Smith, the Development Management and Building Standard Service Manager. We have two team leaders in Mrs. Christine Bryan and Mrs. Anne Condliffe. We have the Vice Convener and Councillor Bob Braun. Our legal manager this morning is Mr. Colin Elliott, and we have Danny Williams from Committee Services. Can I remind all members of the committee that if you are going to leave the meeting or you are unable to participate, then that will then mean that you won't actually be able to vote when you return to the meeting. Now, unfortunately, this also means that if a member loses internet connection during the consideration of any item, that they should not vote. It is down to separate councillor discretion to decide how much they have missed, and normally we can work out reasonably quickly if it's been a short amount of time. So could you please, if you miss a substantial amount of the meeting, advise the clerk in the meeting chat that you had lost your connection and are therefore unable to vote on an item. Thank you. Now, for the proceedings today, can I remind councillors and officers that we are using the meeting chat function. That's how you attract my attention, because I don't have any pictures of anyone up on the screen in front of me. So if you could do that by using the usual prefixes that we've come up with: Q for question, C for comment, PO for point of order, and for officers, if they could put an A in the meeting chat if they wish to answer a question, then that way I will come directly to you for your question or for answer. And I would now like to ask Mr. Williams, the clerk, to advise of all the members that are in front of us today. So if we could go through a roll call, then that way we'll be able to know of who is attending. Thank you. Over to you, Danny.
Yes, thank you, convener, and morning to everyone. So as usual, I just want to meeting. Councillor Anderson.
Present.
Councillor Barnacle.
Present.
Councillor Braun.
Present.
Councillor Drysdale.
Present.
Councillor Gray.
Present.
Councillor Illingworth.
Present.
Councillor James.
Present, Danny, thanks.
We've heard from yourself, convener, so Councillor Purvis.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Wilson.
Present.
And as we already noted, convener, we have Councillor McEwen substituting today. So Councillor McEwen, are you present?
Present.
Okay, so that should be everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, item 2. If any members have a declaration of interest of any of the business in front of us, could they please put a DI in the meeting chat right now? I'll give a minute for that to come through. Okay, there's been nothing there, so I'm taking it that there's no declarations of interest. Can I have the committee's agreement that we are able to hear deputations for items 511 and for 512? Again, I will take silence as an agreement. If anybody has any dissension from that, if they could voice it or put it in the box now. Okay, thank you very much, committee. I'll take it that we're happy to hear the deputations. And that brings us on to item 4, which is the minutes of the Planning and Development Management Committee on the 25th of August. Can I have the agreement that these are agreed and we're happy that they are a true and accurate reflection of the previous meeting? Again, I will take silence as an agreement, but if anyone has any comments, could they put a C in the meeting chat now? Okay, thank you very much, everybody. That is the minutes agreed. Okay, so that brings us swiftly on to 511, which is the first application in front of us, which is an erection of 4 dwelling houses on land northwest of the Croft in Fearnan. And I would like to ask Mrs. Conliffe to speak to the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Before I commence my presentation, I'd like to update members to a revision within the report. This was already circulated to all members by committee services on Monday. There's a proposed revision to condition 4 so that it now reads, prior to the occupation of any dwelling, all matters regarding vehicular access, geometrics and surfacing, car parking, road layout, design and specification, including the disposal of surface water, shall be in accordance with the standards required by the Council as Roads Authority. The reason remains the same, which is in the interests of road safety to ensure an acceptable standard of construction within the public road boundary. The revision has been made to make it clear that all work to the accesses requires to be to an acceptable standard before the occupation of any of the houses. Next slide, please. This is a site plan, and I'll now take members through a presentation of slides which show both plans and various photographic images to set the scene for this proposal. The application, as you'll see on the screen, is for the erection of 4 new detached houses on a site at the western end of the settlement of Fearnan. You will see from the plan on the screen that plot 1 is proposed fronting the A827 between 2 existing properties, Piers and the Croft. 3 other plots are proposed northwards with access to plots 1, 2 and 3 taken from an upgraded access from the A827, and for plot 4 a new proposed access from the minor road over to Glen Line, the C449. Next slide, please. This aerial photo shows the site in red, located within Fearnan on the north side of the application site and the minor road to the west of the site. You'll also note from the aerial shot that the settlement of Fearnan is quite compact, but with significant areas of green, particularly to the east of the site. This is known as the rig system, and the nature of the built development of the village is centred around those historical rigs. Members will be aware that there has been a substantial level of representation to the proposal, and one of the principal concerns has been regarding the loss of open space, referring to the rig system. In terms of character, the centre of Fearnan contains remnants of a traditional rig layout. Those important open spaces between buildings, due to their value to the community for either recreational or amenity purposes, are protected from development by Policy 14A of the Local Development Plan 2. However, the current application site is not identified as one of those areas, and this slide shows the protected rig areas in green and the application site to the west in red. We will now move to a series of photos which seek to show the context of the surroundings. This first photo is looking at the site for plot 1, which sits between 2 properties. Piers to the west, which is the building with the white gable that you can see on this photo, and the Croft, which is located to the east. The proposed house will front the A827 public road from Aberfeldy along the north side of Loch Tay. Access, however, will not be taken directly from the site, but rather from the existing access to the east, which will also serve the proposed houses on plots 2 and 3. Next. This is the site of the proposed access to the plots that I've just referred to. So it goes to access to plots 1, 2 and 3 from the A827. It's a private access and currently serves Croft Cottage in the north. It is proposed that the access will be upgraded. We're now coming up to the top end of this access, and as we proceed northwards up the track with the access to plots 1, 2 and 3 through the gate that you see to the left, and with Croft Cottage straight ahead. This shot is taken from the access that we've just been at, that you saw in the previous photo, and from this entrance point we're looking across the site in a northwest direction to the site for plot 4, which is the one that takes the access off the minor road. The gate that you can perhaps see just about approximately the middle of the screen is a proposed access point from the C449 public road to plot 4. We're now standing on plot 4 and we're looking, which is in the north, and we're looking across the site in a southerly direction down towards Loch Tay. We're looking through plots 3 and 2 to the position of plot 1, which, as I mentioned in the first photo, is proposed to be located fronting the public road. The house for plot 1 will be located in between the property known as Piers Cottage, which you can see the roof of in this photograph, and Croft, which you can just see the rear extension of to the left of the screen. We're still looking from plot 4 here in a southerly direction, but this time we're going through plots 3 to plot 2, and once again you can see the roof lights of the property known as Pier View that I previously referred to. We're now back at the access point to show the final plot. So we're looking across through plots 2 to plot 3 in the western area, and you can see in the distance a property known as Invertay located to the west of the site. This is the final photograph which shows the proposed access to plot 4 from the public road, the C449, which goes over to Fortingill and Glenline. And this is a reverse view from the earlier photo when we were looking from the top of the access to the other plots. That concludes the stills, and we're now back to the site layout plan. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much for the presentation. We'll now move on to deputations, and we have Ms. Susan Dolan-Bettany. Hello. Hopefully that you're in the call. You're making a deputation objecting to the application on behalf of Glenline and Loch Tay Community Council and the Fearnham Village Association. What basically happens now is I'm going to pass you on to the Vice Convener, Councillor Braun, who will go through the sort of timing of the deputations and what have you, and he'll do that, and then it'll return to me, and hopefully you'll be available for some questions from the committee if they have any. Is that acceptable to you?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Over to you, Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Fine. Okay, now, as usual, you'll have 5 minutes to present your deputation. At the 4-minute mark, I would just interrupt you to say you have 1 minute left to go. I'll try to interrupt you when you're not in mid-flow, so there we go. And again, I will warn you when you're at your 5-minute mark. But as I can't see you, what I will do now is, if you're happy to proceed, I will start the clock when I hear your voice next.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
I will deal with the letter points first. Overlooking of Invertay and Pier View, tree and shrub screening takes time to grow, up to 10 years to become effective, and there is no guarantee that future occupier will retain it. Drainage via the public system is not guaranteed by Scottish Water. Conditions, several are listed. The problem with conditions is the ease with which they can be overturned. Incidentally, under planning advice notes, pound 4 appears to be no longer listed in the Scottish Government's list of pounds. Our main objections are 2. Firstly, mass. The application is not a well-considered addition to the village. The massing of, particularly plot 4, is out of character with the rest of the village. The application suggests that these properties sit well within the context and site of Fearnham. This is not the case, as seen from the section drawings, especially when viewed from the main road. It will appear dense. Plot 4 is a substantial structure, almost 8 metres high. The massing is out of all proportion with anything else in the village, both in terms of footprint and height. The size has dominating influence on the proposed development, exacerbated by its prominent location at the top of the slope. The aspect coming down the adjacent public road would be one of a large, predominantly roof mass, which would replace the current open view of the loch. Together with plots 1, 2 and 3, the overall impact of mass would have a detrimental effect on the landscape of the village. The second main objection is access. The junction of the access track with the A827. Consider if it is not possible to have a visibility display because someone else's land obscures it, is the junction still safe? The access to plot 4 is by far the greatest concern because of the likelihood of increasing accidents on the C449, the Fernham Brae. Existing topography document shows an existing gate facing the C49. A gate, yes. A gateway, no. Just a posting gate erected in recent years behind the stock fence. This is deceptive, so please do not be misled. This has never been a gateway. The access to this field is via the track leading to the A827. Transport planning is a list of documents on the planning portal. There is nothing from transport planning. Indeed, under the list of internal consultees, it is stated, transport planning, no consultation has been made in this case. There is no information provided in the documentation of any review by transport planning. Nothing to explain its satisfaction with the proposed access or parking arrangements. Perhaps you councillors have seen one. Plot 4, the design of this access is currently shown as a pair of gates at the road edge line in the vicinity of the false access gate. This detail appears to be contrary to PKC guidelines. The access is dangerous because the gate, as shown, is narrow and is unlikely to be accessed in a single turn, especially when coming down the Brae without having to swing across the road. There is no recess to allow vehicles to pull off the road for gate opening and closing. Neither is there anywhere for delivery vehicles to pull off the road. They would have to park on the carriageway on a bend. Within the boundary, there is insufficient space for a car to turn without excessive manoeuvring due to the proximity of the gate to the garage. To leave in a forward gear, a van or lorry would have to reverse in, which would block the road and leave it exposed to approaching traffic in the process. Taken together, this proposed access is potentially dangerous and totally unacceptable to us.
You have 1 minute left.
This application is more place destroying than place making, and unless you can be absolutely certain without a trace of doubt that the proposed new access will not increase accidents on the Fernham Brae, then please, will you refuse it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll hand you back now to the convener.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Vice Convener there, and thank you for your deputation. Are you happy for members of the committee to ask you some questions?
Yes.
That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Then in that case, I'll open it up to the committee. If they have any questions, could they notify me now in the meeting chat box, and we'll ask Ms. Dolan Bettany for answers. Okay, apologies for the delay. It looks like that there are no questions for you. You've got off reasonably easy this morning. Thank you very much indeed for your for coming along and for giving the deputation. And we'll move on to the next deputation. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have the next deputation is from Mr. Robert Johnston, who is the agent on behalf of the applicant. Mr. Johnston, are you online? Councillor Wilson, I'm sorry, you put a queue in the box. Is that a queue for the previous deputation?
Yes, I'm sorry, convener. I wanted to ask a question of the last deputation, if I may, please, before the second deputation comes along.
Ms. Dolan Bettany, are you still on the line?
Convener, she's left the meeting.
Right. Okay. My apologies. Is there any way we can? I don't know if we can get her back.
I apologise for the delay, convener, but sometimes these you press the buttons and they take a wee bit longer to operate than.
To come through. My apologies. I am trying to give what I believe is a reasonable length of time. I will extend the time frame then, just to be on the safe side. Unfortunately, that means anyone listening will just hear silence for a while, but I'm happy to do that to make sure that we do this properly. Audrey, is there any chance of seeing if we can get Ms. Dolan Bettany back?
I'm just about to call her now.
Okay. If the committee would bear with me, I would prefer to finish questions to Ms. Dolan Bettany rather than proceeding, and then going back. I'd like to make sure that any points that are raised at this point can also be asked of Mr. Johnston, if that is the way it goes. So I would prefer to keep to the process to make sure that we do this as correctly as possible. So if everybody could just bear with us for a moment, then we'll see if we could get Ms. Dolan Bettany back on the line.
Thanks, Convener, for your forbearance. I was finding some difficulty in hearing all of the presentation, partly because at the very moment Ms. Dolan Bettany spoke, a gentleman decided to clean the window of the room I'm in the house. These things happen.
It is, yeah, that's very unfortunate.
That's the explanation. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things with it.
No worries. It would also give other councillors maybe a possibility to, if they have also questions. So I'm happy to do this. So apologies to the committee and to anyone listening, but we'll just have a brief pause while we see if we can get Ms. Dolan Bettany online. And I noticed too, Councillor Gray, that you also have a question. So hopefully we'll have her back online very shortly, and we can do that. So please apologise to everybody, but there will be a short radio silence.
Convener, that's Ms. Dolan Bettany back in now.
Thank you very much indeed, Audrey. Thank you for that. Ms. Dolan Bettany, sorry, apologies for that. We had a slight technical issue, and the questions that were coming through came through after I'd asked you to leave. So my apologies for that. But we do have a couple of questions from councillors if you are happy to take them.
Yes, thank you.
No worries. Thank you very much for coming back on so promptly. The first question, it might be a couple of questions, but the first one is Councillor Wilson. Councillor Wilson, if you could ask your questions, and then we'll go to Councillor Gray. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning, Ms. Dolan Bettany. I'm sorry. I want just to clarify the main points that you were making. I did explain there was an external noise, and we're all working from home, so there was external noise here, and I want to make sure I heard everything properly. In some of the representations that we've heard of, there was discussion about the rig system, but I think your substance of your objection was twofold. One was the scale and massing of some of the buildings, particularly I think the proposed house at plot 4, and also the road access. I think to a degree both road accesses, but particularly the road access from what you referred to as the Fearn and Bray onto plot 4. I should add that I have been to Fearn on several occasions, and I do know the topography reasonably well. So I just wanted to clarify these were the 2 points that you were emphasising in your deputation.
Yes, they are. The rig system is very important, but we only have 5 minutes. So, you know, I have to focus on the really main objections.
Okay.
For that clarification. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Gray, your question, please.
Thank you, Convener. Referring then to plot 4, Ms. Dolan Bettany, you mentioned that the gate wasn't actually a gateway. How do you come to that conclusion? Do you suppose it was put there simply to erect a gate for the sake of it, or do you suppose there was actually an access via that gate to the road?
No, there's never been an access gate. That was put in a few years ago. It just appeared. I can't comment on why, because I don't know. But it has no gate function. It is just a gate hanging on a post, and it does give the impression of being a gateway, but that has never. We have old photographs that go back a long way, and that has never been a gateway. The access has always been from the track out onto the main road.
So. Can I ask, are you suggesting that it was done recently? Could you say how recently?
No, it was done after the plot was. I think it was done after the plot was acquired by the present applicant's father or firm.
And how long ago would that be?
I would guess 2007, but I really am guessing.
Yeah. Forgive me asking, but if it was a new gateway, then presumably there would be a record within the council to state that there was a gateway put there. That's the reason I asked. Anyway, about you said about
behind the stock fence. I mean, it does, you know, there's no function. I mean, the drop from the field to the road at that point is about half a metre.
Right.
It's not a, you know, it's behind the stock fence, so it has no function.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Can I ask councillors if there's any further questions? Councillor Anderson, thank you.
Thank you, convener.
Councillor Anderson, you've popped onto mute again. If you could just unmute and ask your question, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Hopefully that'll be mute off this time. Yes, Mrs. Dolan Bettany, just to follow on from that, if we were minded to give this development the go-ahead, that gate would actually be developed into a proper entrance into that house, which would have visibility splays. Would you not agree that that would improve that particular bit of road, because there would be more visibility at that gate and an opportunity, if there's a splay there, for vehicles to be able to pass one another?
No, I don't agree. I think it would not provide room for vehicles to pass one another, and I think the splays downhill, from what I remember, the splay is obscured at some point by mature canopy and mature trees. Opening that gateway would not help the safety of Fern and Bray at all.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Barnacle, your question, please.
Thanks, convener. Morning, Mrs. Dolan Bettany. Just one point. Paragraph 37 of the report says it is to be accepted that the rising nature of the site means that any form of development will have a visual impact, but the potential impact has been mitigated through design. Do you agree with that sentence, or do you think actually that there hasn't been enough mitigation in the proposal?
No, I don't agree with the sentence. I think viewed from the main road, it will look like a dense development.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Again, I will ask committee, just to make sure that we don't have any time delays again, and just ask committee, are there any further questions from Ms. Dolan Bettany? Okay, I think I've given it a reasonable length of time there. I didn't want you to hang up again and then we'll be in a similar situation as we were earlier. So thank you very much indeed for coming back on. Thank you very much for answering the questions, and we'll move on to the next deputation. So Ms. Dolan Bettany, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you, convener.
Thank you. Okay, so that then takes us on to the second deputation, which, as I've already stated, is from Mr. Robert Johnston on behalf of the applicant. So, Mr. Johnston, are you still available?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you very much indeed. I believe you are here to address the committee and to answer any questions. So if you would like to make your deputation, the same thing will apply. I'll pass you on to Councillor Bob Braun, who is the vice convener, and he'll do all the timing and go through that with you, and we'll go from there. So Councillor Braun, if you would proceed. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, convener. Good morning, Mr. Johnston.
Good morning.
Good morning. As before, you'll have 5 minutes to do your deputation. I'll interrupt you around about the 4-minute mark, just to warn you have 1 minute left to go. Try not to interrupt you in mid-flow if I can. And then again, I will obviously tell you when the 5 minutes are up. So as I can't see you, as before, when I hear you next speak, I will start the clock, if that's all right with you.
Understood. Yeah.
Okay, we're ready to go.
Good morning, elected members. I didn't actually request to make a deputation on behalf of the applicant this morning. My attendance is primarily to answer any questions the elected members may have. However, in relation to the presentation from the Community Council, I think perhaps it's worth me making a couple of points. I couldn't actually hear very much of what Miss Dolan Bettany was saying. The line was particularly poor. That may be at my end rather than with the system. Highland Perthshire's connectivity is not the best in the best of times. But I think if I could just point out, there was a considerable background to this application. We followed procedures as closely as we normally would. We consulted with Perth and Kinross Council at an extremely early stage, well before any planning application was submitted. We did some sketch designs and submitted those to Perth and Kinross Council as part of a pre-planning consultation with John Williamson, who replied, and we took on board his points prior to making any planning application. And then once the planning application was formally submitted to Perth and Kinross Council, we had extended negotiations with Mr. Baxter, Andy Baxter, who over a period of some months, in fact, came back and asked us to make a number of changes and to expand on more information, particularly in relation to bin collection, passing places on the access roads, adjustments to some of the window positions, positions of garaging, visibility splays for particularly the plots 1, 2 and 3, and more information in relation to the visibility display in relation to plot 4. The second concern from the Community Council appears to relate to the massing of plot 4. And I do understand that. However, I should like to point out that we have followed the Council's good guidance throughout. So rather than sort of working against the contours, we have cut and filled, to use a technical term, across the site to make sure that each of the buildings isn't overlooking each other and nestles into the plot, each plot as much as possible. And I suppose finally, what I'd just like to mention is the Fearnan is a lovely little village, and I do understand there are concerns about overdevelopment, but the reality is these plots are all actually very generous, and there was you know, when you actually look at adjacent plots, it is conceivable that more houses could have been put on this site, but that's absolutely not what the applicant is about. He's absolutely about creating one-off high-quality houses on fairly substantial plots, which I earnestly believe is what we've done. And Fearnan is a broad mix of small cottage-style properties to fairly large, substantial two-storey houses.
You have 1 minute left.
I think. Thank you. I think we've reflected that fairly effectively. So we would ask you for your support this morning. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I'll pass you back to the convener.
Thank you very much, Councillor Braun, and welcome back to me. We have a couple of questions that have come forward, so if you don't mind, we'll proceed to that, Mr. Johnson. The first question is from Councillor Wilson, and then we go to Councillor Anderson. Councillor Wilson, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Thanks, convener. Good morning, Mr. Johnson. Thanks for your presentation. I had two questions, but I think I'm going to leave the second one, which was about road access, to Councillor Henry Anderson, because I guess that might be his question. If it isn't, I apologise to my colleague. The question was raised, Mr. Johnson, about the massing, particularly for plot 4, and you mentioned cut and fill. Do you want to say a wee bit more about that in a non-technical term? I think I know what it means, because you either build up, to build a house you need a flat platform, and therefore you either build it up or you scrape it out, in blunt layman's terms. Could you describe in layman's terms what you intend to do on site? Because it's clearly a sloping site, it clearly overlooks the loch. I take the point about the house's orientation, so it's not really about that, it's just about the method and how you intend to diminish the massing by your proposal of cut and fill.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I'll try my best to explain what I mean by cut and fill. As you say, you generally need a flat site to build off of, unless your house steps down the site internally within the building itself. And some of our designs actually do that, so we actually work with the contours rather than against the contours. So what I mean by cut and fill is, if you can imagine having a considerable slope on a site, instead of bringing material onto the site at the uppermost part of the site and then filling the site to create that platform, you can cut out part of the site, so you're digging into the site, so you're working with the contours, and on the lower part of the site, the stuff you dig out from the upper part of the site, you place it on the lower part of the site to create a platform. So your platform, if you like, is sitting in the site rather than on the site. I hope you're following my description. That's about the best I can do, I think.
Thank you. I understand that. Thank you.
If I could draw a diagram, I would.
With respect, we don't have time, but I was following carefully what you said, and I understand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Anderson, I'll come to you, and I'm happy to go back to Councillor Wilson if the question on access isn't actually asked. So, Councillor Anderson.
Strangely enough, I was going to ask that question, convener, but I also had a second question. So, if you give me the second question is a bit of a follow-up to what Councillor Wilson. So we're both in thinking on the same lines. Both the phone calls that we've had in has been poor, so it's very hard to hear exactly what was said. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the lady said that it would be an 8 metres high. One of the houses in the development would be 8 metres high. Is this 8 metres? Obviously, an 8 metre house would be quite a tall house and would be very dominant. Is this, with the topography of the land, and even with your reprofiling of the contours, would some of the building be actually as dominant as 8 metres? That's the first question.
Shall I answer that just now?
Certainly, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind answering that, Mr. Johnson, that'd be great.
Yes. Once we've dug, particularly in relation to plot 4, once we dig into the site to create our reduced level, so you know, when I'm talking about doing the cut and fill exercise, it's not 8 metres from the current level of the grass on the paddock. It's 8 metres from the reduced level. So once we've dug down into the site, it's 8 metres from that point. So 8 metres sounds enormous. In reality, the house that we've designed to sit on plot 4 is not a full 2-storey house, as you know, it's not a ground floor, a first floor and a roof. It's a ground floor and a first floor, and the first floor rooms sit in the roof. But it is the case that the highest part of the roof is 8 metres from the reduced ground level.
Thank you.
There was a concern from one of the neighbours to the north that he would be looking into the roof of this house from a house that he indeed has just completed in the last year or so. So we provided Mr. Baxter, the planning officer, with some site cross sections which should be contained within our application to the council to illustrate beyond all doubt that the ground floor of the house to the north, in fact, is significantly higher than this 8-metre ridge height, because we've dropped the level of the house substantially below the plot to the north, that is. So for example, the ground height difference between the property to the north of plot 4 and the ground of or the ground floor level of plot 4 is about 6 metres. So I hope that that demonstrates how we've addressed the sloping nature of the site.
Thank you very much. That was quite a comprehensive answer, and yes, I understand where you're coming from. Now these splays and the access into these, can you just describe to me what your plans is to ensure that these splays are in keeping with what our transport team would be looking for?
Well, again, during the vetting process of the planning application, Andy Baxter, the planning officer, sent us a number of comments from the roads department expressing some concerns about how we would achieve these, and our drawings illustrated to the roads department and to the planning department how compliance would be achieved. So in relation to plots 1, 2 and 3, we demonstrated beyond doubt really that we can achieve the visibility displays onto the main Kenmore Road without any substantial engineering works. We simply need to adjust the gradient of the road moving from south to north, and a couple of hedges that are contained within the applicant's boundaries need to be trimmed back. But over and above that, there was a concern about, due to the steepness of the access into plots 1, 2 and 3, we suggested it would be a good idea to put in a couple of passing places for the users of plots 1, 2 and 3, but also Croft Cottage, who use the access at the moment. There is certainly a scenario where somebody coming down that track could meet a vehicle coming up. So we offered a couple of passing places, and also for the postman and the inevitable Amazon delivery lorry and all these other guys that seem to constantly be delivering to houses these days. And in relation to plot 4, there is obviously the community council are very concerned about that. But again, we have checked all those visibility displays. There is a realignment of the fence that bounds plot 4 and the Fiernan Brae, I think it's referred to. So there is a realignment needed, but the visibility to the north and to the southwest does comply with road standards fully. There's one very modest tree which is not in a good condition, which will have to come down, but there's substantial replanting proposed on plot 4 to more than mitigate for the loss of that single tree. I mean, effectively there are next to no trees on plot 4 or any of the plots at this stage because it's paddock, but there is substantial replanting proposed. So, I mean, I think I would suggest the roads department are happy, and there are substantial conditions proposed to ensure the roads are carried out prior to occupation. So I would like to think that would satisfy the elected members this morning.
Thank you for that, Mr. Johnson. That's again very comprehensive. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question, Mr. Anderson. And I see that Councillor Barnacle would like to ask a question, but there's a sort of follow-on from the points that were made there. It was mentioned earlier on by Ms. Dolan-Bettany that access and that some of the land wasn't actually within the control of the applicant, and that might have an effect. Can you just confirm that there is no issue regarding being able to open display for this junction or for this ending?
That is absolutely my understanding, and that has been checked by the boundaries that are on the application are wholly within the ownership of the applicant, and that has been checked by their legal advisors as well. So.
Okay, thank you. Yep, no, that's fine. That answers that question. It was just a sort of follow on from the other information, but that sprung to mind. Councillor Barnacle, your question, please.
Yes, thanks, convener. Morning, Mr. Johnston. Paragraph 35 of the report points out the proposed density is low, with only 4 houses on 0.6 hectares. However, obviously the site is sloping, as we've heard, and concerns regarding visual impact. Is it actually, did you consider that you could have, I noticed plot 2 is single storey, did you consider at any time that you could actually accommodate 4 houses that were single storey on that site, which may have gone some way to alleviating concerns about the visual impact, overlooking, etc.? Did you consider that?
Yes, we did, Councillor Barnacle. As I said earlier, Fearnan is a perfectly charming Highland village, and it has a broad mix of house types. So as an architect, we tried to reflect the broad mix of typology that is found in Fearnan. So, plot 1, for example, is a house that is specific to that site. It could only be constructed on that site. And by that I mean it addresses the road, it addresses the private space, it addresses the buildings to the east and west, the Croft and Pier View, and is a 2-storey house, albeit all of the houses are very much what I call sort of a 1.5-storey house rather than 2 stories, because the first floor is very much in the roof in all cases. Plot 2, as you so correctly say, is a single-storey house, and that was done perfectly purposefully because of the proximity to plot 1, assuming plot 1 is approved, of course, but also the orientation of plot 2. It wasn't possible to grab a view from the first floor without impinging on the privacy of plot 1 or Pier View in particular. So we realised very quickly that plot 2 should be a single-storey house to avoid any potential loss of amenity to any other property. And also plot 2 is a relatively flat plot and sits relatively low within the site. However, as you move up through the site, the gradient and the topography gets correspondingly steeper, so it is easier to have first floors on plot 3 and plot 4 to just achieve this broad mix of house types across the site. And obviously we're, as you'll have seen from Anne Conleth's photographs, we're fairly blessed in Highland pasture with stunning views on most plots, and we frankly want to capture as much of the view of Lochte to the south and west as possible from the plots on the upper part of the site.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed. We have no more questions coming forward, so I'll just ask again from the committee, do we have any further questions for Mr. Johnston? No, Mr. Johnson, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Thank you for the full and comprehensive answers. And we will now open this section up to questions for officers. So, committee, do we have any questions for council officers? Okay, thank you very much. We have start off with Councillor Anderson and then followed by Councillor Barnacle.
Yes, thank you, convener. It's basically the same question to officers. Obviously, visibility displays is a big thing. As far as what's been presented to them, are they quite confident that this plan will achieve the visibility displays that will ensure road safety at both plots 1, 2 and 3 and the visibility display for plot 4? Can I get their comments on that, please?
Certainly, I'd like to ask Mr. Mike Lee from Transport to answer that question for you, Councillor Anderson. Mike, over to you, please.
Hi, good morning all. First of all, I'd just like to address a comment from Ms. Dolan Bettany. She mentioned that there was no report from Transport Planning within the planning documents. There has been a document submitted, and Transport Planning were involved from the early pre-app stages. I had a look this morning when she mentioned it, and it does not appear to be in the public portal, but it is within our portal. So that's just to address that first of all. Yes, we have looked at the visibility displays, and with the removal of some shrubs and trees, we are satisfied that the required visibility displays can be met.
Thank you. And when you're up at the Fairnon Hill, will that display actually benefit by being unofficially a passing place as well in that particular tight road?
We would not necessarily recommend that it be used for that. In reality, you know, it can be used for that purpose in real life, but it's certainly not something we would promote. But there's no reason why it can't be used, just like on any rural road of the same nature.
Yeah, as a professional driver, you're often glad of a place to go into.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Next we have Councillor Barnacle, then followed by Councillor Gray.
Thanks, convener. Yeah, I have 2 questions for planning. First of all, could they confirm what I believe to be the case, that this is not a zoned housing site in LDP2, so it's not, it could be, as it says in the report, it could have any particular use that's acceptable to the council. It's not a zoned housing site as I understand it. That's question 1. And question 2.
Sorry, Councillor Barnacle, can we take them one at a time if that's okay?
Okay.
It stops different people coming in and allows me to make it a little bit easier going through who's answering what questions. So Mrs. Conleth, could you answer that question for Councillor Barnacle?
Yes, convener. You're correct, Councillor Barnacle. It's not a zone site. There are no zone sites within Fearnan itself. At the time of the local development plan, what it was done was there were sites that were protected from development, which was shown on that slide with regard to the green areas in the rig system. So that prevented development in there. And then it was suggested that beyond that, there was scope for infill development, which could take place in any other areas within the settlement boundary of Fearnan without damaging the nature of the village, which is centred around that central rig system. So this particular site is not zoned for anything in particular. It's considered to be white land, which would allow for a range of uses.
Thanks very much, Anne. My second question is, you heard the exchanges about the scale of the development in relation to the low density, but also the rising nature of the site. Are you confident that all has been done to protect the visual impact and residential amenity of existing residents in the way the site has been put forward in liaison with planning and brought forward at this stage, without more maybe single-storey development, as I alluded to?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Barnacle. Mrs. Conliffe, your answer, please.
Yes, as the deputation from the agent stated, there has been significant discussion with the planning department throughout the consideration of this application, and there have been amended plans, a number of amended plans submitted, and it was for a number of reasons, which included trying to ensure the protection of the amenity of existing residential properties. We had a number of changes which included reorientation of buildings, the dropping of the buildings, getting the details with regard to the cut and fill that has already been described this morning, and also looking at windows. And this was all to ensure that the existing residencies, as well as the proposed houses, had satisfactory amenity. And we are more than satisfied with that in terms of the heights of the buildings, the mass of the buildings. In general, the other point I'd like to make is that when you look at Fearnan as a whole, this obviously is infill development, and there are a number of properties that surround it, and therefore it will read within the village as a whole rather than sticking out at the edge of the village. So in answer to your question, yes, we are satisfied that everything has been done and we have proposed a very good development.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Barnacle. Councillor Gray, your question has been answered, so that brings us on to Councillor Wilson. Your question, sir.
Thank you. You'll be relieved to know that a couple of questions, and the last one's been covered under Councillor Barnacle stuff. Just to confirm, at the very beginning of the meeting, Mrs. Conliffe read out I think an addendum or addition to planning condition about road standard. Was that designed to help allay some of the concerns about the road access for plot 4 in particular?
Okay, I'm going to go back to Mrs. Conliffe for an answer for that, please.
The reason for the change was more about the timing of it. We were satisfied with all the conditions that we had, but it was previously we'd had a comment that said development hereby approved being completed or brought into use, and we didn't think that in discussion with our legal representatives that was clear enough, and that was why we brought in to state that it was prior to the occupation of any of the houses. So it wasn't actually changing anything with regard to what was being required in terms of roads, but simply in terms of the timing of when it was all to be completed.
Okay, you've already answered that you're content with the road conditions, so thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'm just going to ask a question just to get a confirmation from a point that was raised by Ms. Dolan Bettany, which was regarding the concerns of moving over to the other side of the road and issues for existing traffic. Can I possibly ask Mr. Lee, what kind of, I mean, I know the area reasonably well, but what kind of existing traffic do we have on that road? And are we confident that we've taken all that into consideration?
Yes, we've looked at this extensively. The road safety information, there's no objection from road safety, our colleagues in road safety. There's no reported accidents in the area. It's fairly minimal traffic flows. With the topography of the road, there's very slow speeds going uphill, certainly. Slightly faster speeds coming downhill, but we've discussed this with our road safety colleagues and they're perfectly happy with the proposals.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. So I will ask, are there any further questions for officers? Okay, no, none, thank you. And then that will then allow us to move on to motion. So I'm going to ask for a motion if there's anyone that would like to put a motion forward. I always like to give the opportunity to others, but if no one's taking it, then I'm happy to put forward the motion to agree the application. There's always a time delay with this, is there not? Okay, I will happily concede because it is me a lot of the time, but to Councillor James.
Thanks, Convener. Quite happy to have seconded you, to be honest. I think, yes, while there were some representations, 19, I think, what we mustn't forget is there were actually 9 representations in support of this. I think we've had explained to us this isn't overdevelopment. I think it's been a great use of an infill plot. And I think it'll be an addition, a nice addition to the area. It's not unusual, and I'm very much in support of this. So quite happy to agree as proposed by our officers.
Okay, thank you very much. With the, are you happy to do that with the amendment that came forward?
Yeah, we actually had that earlier in the week anyway, Convener, so I'd assumed that's what it was anyway.
Nope, that's fine. Thank you very much indeed. To Councillor Wilson, you're happy to second.
Convener, with your consent, obviously. Yes, I think we've had a good discussion on this in these difficult times when it's hard sometimes hearing folk and stuff like that, but we got the gist of what the deputations were. I think the concerns here were genuine. This is a lovely wee village. I've visited many times with my previous convener's hat on, and I can understand why folk are worried about development in the village. It's a very well knit community, but I think these proposals have been as well thought out as they might be. Inevitably, if you want to occupy a wee field, or a middle-sized field in this case, with houses, there's going to be concerns because a lot of folk have lived there for a long time without any development near them. But I think the type of houses that are proposed, the setting, particularly the orientation of the houses, I thought there'd been a good deal of thought to that was the least invasive in terms of privacy to the existing dwellings. And at one time, the houses that are there now weren't there, and there may have been concern about some of them at the time, way back in the mists. So yes, it's a prominent site. I'm pleased about the reassurances we've had about road access, which is always an issue, but the amount of traffic on the road is, as Mr. Lee said, fairly minimal. Busier in the summer and very light in the winter time. And I think the proposals should be approved and given consent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Can I ask the committee, are there any amendments to this application? Again, I'll give it a wee moment. Okay, I'll state that there are no amendments, and then in that case the application is approved, and thank you very much indeed. I agree wholeheartedly that I think we've had a good discussion and a good debate on this, so the application is now approved and that allows us to move on to the next application. Okay, so the next application in front of us is a local application in Logie Amend in the erection of entrance gates, bin store and associated works at Logie Amend Estate in Logie Amend. And I would like to ask Christine Bryan to speak to the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Just before I start the presentation, I would like to update members with a revision to the report. It was circulated to all members by committee services at the start of the week. There's a proposed revision to the informative 6 at the end of the report, which now reads: the granting of planning permission does not stop the continued right of public access along the existing core path MEF 130. An order under the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act 1997, Section 208, or an amendment of the core path plan under the Land Reform Scotland Act 2003 should be sought in advance of any works authorised by this planning being commenced. All relevant approvals should be in place prior to any stopping up and diversion of the core path taking place. And it's just in order to clarify that there are two potential processes for the revision of the core path route, and that the revision process should be completed in advance of the development, if granted planning permission, being commenced. So full planning permission is being sought for the erection of two sets of gate piers, one with associated entrance gates and a binstone enclosure, along with associated works which comprise the formation of a path for non-motorised use. I will now take you through some stills to clarify the site location and to give you a bit of context of the site area. This first still is an aerial photograph which shows in the main part the site's position in relation to the settlement of Harrietfield, which sits to the east. It also shows the location of the main estate house to the northwest and the core path, which is the dotted purple line. The inset zooms in on the site itself and the public road, which adjoins the southernmost part of the site. The access junction sits at the topmost part of the upturned U-bend of the public road. The next still shows the site plan and the extent of the application site in more detail. The part on the left is the southernmost section from its junction with the public road at the bottom. The second set of gate piers, the lockable gates and the footpath access gate are located roughly halfway up in the crux of the Y. The proposed path then runs parallel to the existing track, which continues northwards. The right-hand side of the plan shows more of the existing access with a narrower proposed footpath to the left. You will see the footpath rejoins the existing track at the north of the application site. The next still is a photo of the junction with the public road. The photo is taken from the middle of the road looking north into the existing bellmouth. You will see some large boulders which have been sited to stop the informal parking within the bellmouth area. The next photo is looking eastward along the public road towards Harrietfield. You can see where the existing bins are located, quite close to the road edge. The proposed bin store is to be sited on the same side but further into the access, some 5 metres back from the carriageway edge. The next photo looks northwards up the existing access. The proposed gate piers would sit roughly at the second stone in from the left, third stone from the right. The bin store is located just out of shot on the right-hand side. The next photo shows the point where the new footpath would separate from the existing access track. The existing field gate at the left of the shot will be slightly relocated with a 1.8 metre wide footpath gate immediately to its east and the path then running to the right hand side of the tree, which is to be retained. The second set of gate piers, this time with the lockable gates, will be sited roughly to where the wooden post is at the right hand side of the shot. It's clear that some of the preparatory works of clearing vegetation has been carried out, but nothing that seems to have required planning permission. The next photo shows the track and the cleared route of the proposed path alongside. This is roughly the midway along the parallel section. The next photo shows the northern extent of the application site, where the proposed path would rejoin the existing track, which is visible to the right of the screen and which then curves round to the northwest. The final photo shows the track continuing into the distance. Just visible on the left-hand side of the shot is Kipney Farm, which has recently been granted planning permission for the creation of 6 holiday accommodation units. So that concludes the stills convener, and we're now back to the proposed site plan.
Thank you very much indeed for that. So we now move on to deputations on this. We have, hopefully you're with us, Mr. Faringham. Are you there?
I'm here.
Yep, thank you very much indeed. Mr. Faringham is the agent on behalf of the applicant and is here to answer any questions. Is that correct, rather than giving a set deputation?
Well, I have a small statement to make, and then I'm free for any questions. Absolutely.
Well, Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. As you have a statement to make, we really should be following the exact procedure, which will mean it will be timed. So I'll pass you on to the Vice Convener, Councillor Bob Braun, who will go through the timing aspect of it. I'm sure it won't take the 5 minutes, but we will follow procedure. So if I could pass you on to Councillor Braun, he'll take you through that and then you'll come back to the main committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Farningham. I hope you can hear me all right.
Good morning. I can hear you perfectly.
Fine. Okay. As you've been told, we normally give you 5 minutes for your deputation. Whether or not you'll take that amount of time, I don't know. But if you do, I will give you a warning at the 4-minute mark that you have 1 minute left. But as with everybody else, I can't see you. So when I hear you next speak, I will start the clock for you. Okay.
Okay. Good morning. The owners of the estate would wish to construct a permanent set of entrance gates to create a sense of arrival and provide increased security for staff and guests staying within the various areas of new tourist accommodation that have recently been established on the estate following significant investment by the new owners since they purchased the estate in January 2019. The proposed stone piers with metalwork gates are of a form and design similar to entrance gates that can be found on nearby estates, for example, Glen Amond Estate to the west. The gates have been sized to allow for safe access to the full range of farm, forestry and construction vehicles that currently use the estate access road. An entry system that allows the gates to be opened and closed remotely by estate staff is to be installed. Although the vehicular gates would generally be closed except when facilitating access, the proposals include for a new gated access to the core path that would not be lockable, ensuring unrestricted and unobstructed access to the core path at all times. The use of gates as part of the core path network is not unusual and is a common feature aimed at managing and securing livestock. In this regard, the length of core path which currently crosses the estate features a number of gates which are non-lockable. The proposed gates are to be constructed over the existing main access road to Logie Amond Estate, which forms an integral part of the local core path network. As a consequence, the proposals include a short diversion to the core path. The proposed diversion provides a new 200-metre length of core path running parallel to the existing access road that allows for unrestricted continuous access to the wider established core path route. The core path diversion is a minimum of 2.5 metres wide and is consistent with the Scottish Government's published guidance on improving public access, which states that a core path should be a minimum of 1.8 metres wide. The diversion would be barrier-free and suitable for multi-use by walkers, cyclists, horse riders, wheelchairs and mobility scooters. Gentle gradients of no more than 1 in 12 will be provided throughout the length of the diversion. The new gated access to the core path is a self-closing gate suitable for accommodating all core path users. It will be unlockable and DDA Equality Act compliant with suitable signage on display in order to ensure the core path diversion is clearly defined. The gate will also be to British Horse Society standards. The proposed diversion will provide a safer route for core path users that avoids potential conflict with vehicular traffic in and around the proposed entrance gates area. Operations on the estate include forestry and farming activities. Large articulated lorries and farming vehicles, therefore, regularly use the existing access road. Given the size of these vehicles and the narrowness of the existing road width in the environs leading to and from the new entrance gates, the proposed diversion will allow a route for core path users that will keep them at a safer distance from larger vehicles than currently prevails. To conclude, I would commend these well-considered and carefully designed proposals to you and respectfully ask that you support the Planning Officer's recommendation of approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farningham. I'll pass you back to the convener. Thank you.
Indeed, thank you, Councillor Braun, and thank you very much indeed for that statement. We have Councillor Wilson that would like to ask a question. So, Mr. Farningham, I'll pass you on to Councillor Wilson for your question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, convener, and thanks for the presentation. It helped explain some of the background to this and what you're planning to do. in the representations, there's an issue about parking, and we saw the bellmouth to the existing driveway, if I can call it that, that's got big boulders in it that, as was described, to prevent parking. You know, obviously folk want to use the core path, and some of them will arrive by car. Are there any park? I didn't quite pick up from what you said what proposals were for parking around the area. Where would one park their vehicle? And my secondary question is, do cyclists use the core path if it's as good as you've described? And they would inevitably, some of them perhaps arrive by car before they start the cycle run. So just comments on the parking facilities around, please.
Okay. First of all, the area at the front entrance to the estate has been used informally over a period of time for the use of cars. Now, it's acknowledged that the access area off the public road has been used for this purpose. But as far as I understand, it doesn't have any established use in planning terms, and indeed it's on private land and doesn't form part of the public highway. And certainly in terms of these proposals, it's not intended that the landowner would be providing for car parking. My understanding is that there's no requirement for car parking to be associated with core path access. Logie Amend Estate, as you're probably aware, is an established forestry, farming and indeed sporting estate, and requires unrestricted vehicular access at all times in order to facilitate its day-to-day business operations. And the parking of cars at the estate entrance has and indeed continues to cause potential obstruction to these operations and creates a significant safety risk. So therefore, on that basis, there's no intention as part of these proposals, or indeed at any time in the future, for the estate to be providing an area for car parking. In relation to your second question regarding cyclists, I myself was a cyclist, and I actually live in Strathbran at Borlick, and I regularly travel over from Borlick over the core path route, down heading over towards Glenamond. And on that basis, I've got first-hand experience that it is a well-worn and well-used path.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We also have a question from Councillor McEwen. Can I have your question, please?
Thank you very much, Convener. Mr. Farring, you've just said that there's permanent access for vehicles to the site for the actual estate's business. But obviously, being a core path, members of the public are using this path, and again, you've just said that that's something that's well used. My concern is around the access for emergency services should somebody become injured using the core path, and what the contingencies are for the estate to allow the, say, ambulance services to access the gate. And that should, what's the second level? Should the first man who could open the gate not be available, or there's an issue, or he's away somewhere, and because obviously we don't want to restrict access to emergency services should somebody become injured on the path.
Absolutely, it's a very good question, and if I'm being perfectly honest, it's not something that either myself or the applicants have considered. But my understanding is that the access to the gates will be available for vehicles if they were required to attend an emergency, and I'm absolutely certain that could be facilitated in the same way that the access is going to be controlled in order to allow for private vehicles facilitating the estate. So I don't think that there would be an issue as far as emergency vehicles are concerned.
So do you think that at the gates there will be an information point in which somebody could contact for emergency access?
Yes, there would be. So that in the case of an emergency, contact details would be available, and there would be people on site. I mean, this is an estate that was lying redundant for quite a while, and the new owners have spent a huge amount of time and effort in restoring the estate. And on that basis, it will be an active estate, and there will be someone available 24 hours.
Thank you for your answer.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Sorry, I'm just seeing who's next. Sorry, Councillor Anderson is next. But I just wanted to make a small point there, as much as that's very interesting, and thank you very much indeed for your question, Councillor McEwen. I don't believe that access like that is a planning issue, but thank you very much indeed for the question and for the answer. Councillor Anderson, your question, please.
Well, again, my question might not be a planning issue, but I'm trying to get my head around what exactly we're looking at here. Has the process for changing the route of the core path been completed with what we are seeing in some sort of construction going on up the path?
No, it hasn't. I don't know if you're fully aware, but there's a two-part process to this. The first part of the process is to achieve planning permission, which is what we're looking to secure today. If we are successful in securing planning permission, the second part of that process is to make an application for the diversion of the core path, and that's a separate process from the process of planning. But you can only apply for that. You can only apply for that second part of the process as when and if you have achieved planning permission. And we have already been in discussions with the case planning officer, who has very kindly provided us with details as to how the process works in relation to seeking permission for the diversion of the core path. So it's two different parts of the process, and both parts of the process need to be positive, otherwise it doesn't happen.
Thank you. Just to follow up to that, if you would be okay with that, convener. So certainly. All this sort of work at the side of the road, is this road improvements then? Is this nothing to do with the core footpath?
This is primarily road improvements. If you have visited the estate, councillor, you will see that beyond the access from the public road, there is currently significant improvements being made to the surface of the access track to improve the surface and also to improve visibility as well.
Thank you. Thank you, convener, for giving me that, allowing me that. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you very much indeed. Do we have any further questions? No, thank you. Okay, Mr. Farningham, thank you very much indeed for your attendance this morning. There's no further questions for you, so thank you for that. And then we will pass it on now to the next stage of the committee, where members can ask questions of officers. So thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so that allows us to open up to questions for officers, and we have a few coming in. So to start off with, we will go to Councillor Gray, then followed by Councillor Wilson. Councillor Gray, your question, please.
Yes, thank you, convener. I just want to clarify or gain clarification on the business of the formalisation of the statutory core path condition. And I know Jane Pritchard put forward a recommendation that it be formalised before the core path was created, and I now see, and I think I understand correctly, Christine Bryan clarified that issue, that it will be formalised properly before the core path actually commences to be constructed. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll pass that on to Mrs. Bryan just for an answer. But yeah, as was the update and the details that were given right at the beginning of it, this is actually sort of a dual process, and as was just explained. But I'll pass it on to Mrs. Bryan for answer. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. It really is just to reiterate what you say. It is a two-part process. The first part is dealing with the planning application in front of us at the moment, and the separate second part is the potential diversion for the core path. Although very similar in nature, they do run separately. So as the agent is fully aware, the diversion of the core path has to be agreed before the planning permission can be fully implemented. The revised informative just is a little bit more explicit in stating that the core path diversion should be agreed prior to the commencement of any works under this planning permission.
Okay, thank you. That does clarify. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillor Wilson, your question, please.
Thanks, Convener. Just a follow up from that, and I'm on page 24 of the report and para 20, and ask a couple of points. Ask Christine Bryan if community green space are completely happy with the arrangements made for the core path diversion and other associated works, notwithstanding the answers she's already given to Councillor Gray about the additional information outlined at the beginning of the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Bryan.
Thank you. Community Green Space have been involved in consultation on the planning application and discussions prior to that as well. They are happy with the content of the planning application. The core path diversion is not in front of them at the moment, so I cannot answer on that element of it, but they are happy with the standards proposed as part of the planning application, from the width of the self-closing core path gate to the width of the footpath as well. There is a slight difference in the surfacing material, and we have a suspensive condition just so that we can clarify the surfacing material of that path, just to make sure it is then going to be compliant should the core path diversion be agreed.
Okay, thank you. I'm also going to ask Jane Pritchard, since I know she's in the meeting, if she's got anything she wishes to add to that. Jane.
The only thing that I would add is that the process that we have to go through to do the core path amendment would be open to public consultation. So it's not a quick thing, and it gives people the ability to object. If there's objections that can't be resolved, it goes to inquiry at the Scottish Government to be resolved.
Okay, thank you. And I believe Mr. Elliott would like to come in on that as well.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I had been involved. It's an unusual process under a Section 208 order. I have been involved in that, and just to clarify that in terms of the informative, it is very much recommended that the applicant apply as before commencing development to get that order, and the reason for that is the process. If there are unresolved objections, it goes to the ministers and can take a very long time. But the actual stopping up of the existing section and the diversion onto the new section has to be all the processes and approvals need to be in place at the point of completing the development, which essentially is the locking of the gates on this particular circumstance. But it is a separate process. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Councillor Wilson, does that answer the question?
Thank you. And insofar as we can, Convener, I think it's important to understand the difference between the core path issues and with the Environment Service and the planning. At least I think I understand them. But I think it's important in terms with a planning hat on, we secure as much of this as we possibly can. My second point, it's slightly naughty question in the sense of it's partly a comment, but I did ask the estate representative agent about parking. Now let's live in the real world. This is a really important core path which is well used, right? That's why we're asking all the questions about it, and some people will come and they'll park. Now the answer we got from the applicant's agent was it's not part of our application and we're not obliged to do it. I understand that, but let's live in the real world. There will be folk come and park their cars, mostly not cyclists actually, because they'll bike up to Logie Amend anyway. But I could ask, is it Harrietfield that's the nearest place where people might park to go? And if so, is there a safe walk to get onto the core path? Because what I don't think I've got major problems with the application, but it's the implications of the application that I'm thinking about. And if somebody tells me this isn't a planning issue, I'll be quiet. But as I say, we all live in the real world.
Absolutely, Councillor Wilson, and I will go to Mr. Elliott to answer that. I want to just raise as convener that we have to be careful what fits in with planning legislation and planning and what falls out with it. And as much as it would be lovely to go around asking for parking spaces, etc., unfortunately that doesn't necessarily fall within the remit. But I will go to Mr. Elliott for an answer to your question.
Thank you, Convener, and I think you've just about made the point I was going to make, in that the loss of the informal parking isn't actually before you today. It is not actually part of the application. That's been done. Putting the boulders there was done for a purpose, as the applicant's agent has explained, to my understanding. But what I can add is that this has been looked at behind the scenes about the provision of informal parking. Under the Land Reform Act, which is where your access rights come from, that is essentially about pedestrian use. It's not about vehicular use. Of course, cyclists and horse riders as well. So it is a difficult position under the Act. The actual Act does not allow for vehicular access and doesn't provide any mechanism to provide informal spaces. There is reference in the Outdoor Access Code to working with landowners to provide that, but that has not been, on this occasion, it's not been provided. I've also consulted my roads solicitor colleague, and there's nothing specific in roads that allows for the provision by the Roads Authority of informal parking places. So it is a difficult issue. You can see the practical reason why you might want the informal places, but from a legal perspective, it doesn't fall under the Land Reform Act. And as I say, from this particular application, it's not part of the assessment of the planning application. It's out with that.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Elliott. Also, I'm going to go to Mr. Smith. I'm hoping that as well, Mr. Smith, if you could also answer an idea of what would be the nearest parking, as I believe that was a question that Councillor Wilson did ask. So, Mr. Smith, if you happen to know that as well, that would be great to your answer.
Thank you, Convener. I'm not sure that I could answer that. I'm not as familiar as the Honourable Councillor Wilson in terms of the local area. Perhaps he can confirm that himself, or one of the officers can perhaps take that on. But in terms of the situation, I think all I would probably say is yes, we can't really consider the issue of parking under the planning process, but I'm sure Mr. Farningham is here, he has listened, and he will feed back to his client, and it's quite clear that options to make provision for parking as close to the beginning of this core path will be noted, and it may well be that they would like to bring forward something in due course.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilson, does that answer your question? I mean, I know the area reasonably well myself, but I'm not 100% sure what would be the nearest parking area to it, so I wouldn't even want to try and make a guess at that. But as the rest answering your question.
I think as far as it can be convenient, but it just shows in some ways the weaknesses of the planning system when we plan for something that's the mechanistic part of it, and we know fine in our heart of hearts that there will be a consequence and we cannot deal with it. However, it will be a different subject for a different day. Thank you for your forbearance.
Absolutely, that's a definite longer discussion for another time. Councillor Barnacle, and then to Councillor McEwen. Thank you.
Thanks, Convener. Actually, my questions have been answered by the two previous issues discussed, so I'm happy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Barnacle. So that relates to yourself, Councillor McEwen.
Thank you very much. I'm aware through my work as a councillor with the Strathmore Cycle Network that such strands have a quality by which they would like paths to be constructed to meet their funding requirements. So what I'm wondering is whether this replacement of the core path is being built to that type of standard, so the type of standard that Sustrans would demand. Because I'm aware that you can build road cycle paths and walking paths without that standard because you're not applying for Sustrans funding. So it's the quality of the actual road itself that I'm asking about.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I'll go first and foremost to Mrs. Bryan and then to Mr. Smith.
My understanding is that the path is to be constructed in a manner that would meet the requirements under the core path provision. I am not aware of them having been in touch with Sustrans about that, but it might be that Jane Pritchard can give a little bit more advice on that, if you don't mind.
Certainly, I can see that Jane has also stated that she's happy to come in if needed. So we'll come to Jane in a minute. Mr. Smith, if you would like to put your point across, please.
Yeah, I think Jane Pritchard may well be able to provide more detail, but the requirements of Sustrans in order to obtain funding are not a relevant factor in considering this. Whether they have considered Sustrans' own personal requirements such that they will fund works, which is not happening here to my understanding, is something I'm not aware of, but I'll defer to Jane.
Okay, then I think to get an answer to the question, we'll head to Jane, if you wouldn't mind. Jane, can you give us some advice regarding that?
Yes, the Sustrans standard is very much a kind of road standard, hardtop surfacing, which would not be in keeping with the estate road here. In terms of what we would expect for the core path, it would be of a similar standard to the track that they're replacing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, hopefully that answers your question, Councillor McEwen. Can I ask, are there any further questions for officers? Nope, then in that case we go to ask for a motion. Again, I'm happy to do it, but I'm always happy to open it up to other committee members. Right, well, just to move things on, Councillor Wilson, we've got in there. There you go. Thank you.
Thanks, Convener. I think again we've had a good discussion on this item. It's really important for the growth of tourism and countryside industries, if I can call it that we get applications like this. I don't have a great problem with the gates. I think I can understand why the estate wants to make a you've arrived type of thing. It's not unusual in Perthshire to have gates at the entrance to an estate, and if that's going to make the entry experience for tourists a wee bit better, then that's fine with me. I think that we've had the answers about the design stuff. The main issues have been far more about the core path actually than the gates, if we're being honest. And I think the questions were designed to ensure, as far as we could, in planning terms, that the core path is protected and used, because it, as the applicant's agent said, he gave a good answer when he said, I come on my bike to my work sometimes. Thought that was helpful. That this is how we're going to grow tourism and industry in the future, in these very difficult and sometimes dark times we have, Convener. So I think what they're proposing is acceptable in my mind. I understand the concerns about it, but I think we've asked about them as much as possible, and I would therefore move the report.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Barnacle, you're happy to second?
I am indeed, Convener. I think Councillor Wilson said what I would have said, so that's fine.
Okay, so can I just confirm that Councillor Wilson and Councillor Barnacle are happy with the amended informative that was mentioned at the beginning of the application, rather than just amending the original report?
Absolutely.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Okay, do we have any amendments to the application? Right, I am giving it a slightly longer pause, but nothing has come forward. So that would then state that the application is approved, and we have time for comments, of which I believe Councillor Anderson, has a comment. Councillor, your comment, please.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, it's with regret that I have no other avenue but to accept this application for approval. However, I feel it's that the estate that is seemingly promoting tourism, that to withdraw informal parking without even considering an alternative parking offer is really, to me, quite disappointing. And I hope that the estate management reconsiders this, because it's important that we have a facility for people to be able to park, take their mountain bikes off, and go up this path, or even just park their car and go for a walk up the core paths. And without parking, I think it's actually undermining the value of this core footpath. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your comment, Councillor Anderson. I would also like to make a comment. It's just on the way this is in the process. We've had to go through a process to look at planning and what actually falls within the planning guidelines and the planning parameters, which we have done. I think we're all going to be very interested to know how this actually proceeds when it goes through the other process to actually get the core path through and making sure that that meets what we would want as councillors in the area. I do take on board what Councillor Anderson is saying regarding the informal parking. It is one of the situations that happen a lot, that when something has happened for a long time, whether it be agreed by the council, whether it be agreed in any formal capacity or not, if it hasn't been agreed and it then moves and disappears, then we are at a loss because we are so used to having it. And that, for me, means that I would prefer things were done properly, and we would prefer that things are done through the proper process so that things don't end up getting lost when things change. So unfortunately, in this case, we're going to lose some parking that was informally there in the first place. But I think we'll all be looking forward to see how things progress with this. And there is a comment that's just been made up by Jane there. I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to read it. That we've offered to work with the estate on parking, but they have stated that they're not going to provide it. So that is within their prerogative. But it is one of those situations where, as I say, if something isn't agreed formally, then when it is lost, there's not much that can be done. So anyway, that's my comment on that. And as there are no further comments, we will then accept that the application is approved, and we'll move on to the next piece of business in front of us today. So that brings us forward to the first of two proposal of application notices. And this one is the formation of battery energy storage system comprising of container units, installation of a substation, erection of fencing, landscaping and associated works at land south of New House Farm in Perth. And as with all pre-applications, I would like comments to come from the committee so that officers can write them down and to look at that when the application goes through its process. Councillor Anderson, you are first, sir. You have your comments for officers to look at. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Convener. I would like officers to look carefully at the access, which I see by the looks of things comes in from Glendevin Farm, which has a narrow bridge across. My concern is about emergency vehicles, and I don't want to be alarmist, but battery storage, I know technology is moving forward, but battery storage, it can be quite unstable. And if there was, God forbid, a fire or any other emergency there, it would be quite hard for emergency vehicles to get there with the specialist equipment that you require for an incident to happen on a battery storage area. So I think that needs to be looked carefully at, because I know I've been in several times to Glendevin for various things, including the caravan site, and I think it's just a narrow bridge across the bypass, and I wouldn't think there'd be any improvements to that, but that needs to be looked at.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilson, your comment for officers to look at through the process.
Thanks, Convener. I totally agree with Councillor Anderson. I think this is technically in the Amend and Erin ward, but it's one of these interesting places where the access is from a mixture of Perth South and Perth North wards. Councillor Anderson's completely right. There's a narrow road with not any real pavements that leads to the farm, including Noah's Ark. So I share that concern about emergency access, but also generally about vehicular access, especially during the construction phase, because that usually involves, this is heavy kit that's going in here, heavy equipment, I understand. I don't know an awful lot about battery storage, but if it's anything like other installations that we've considered, then there'll be quite a lot of construction traffic. So I think in terms of page 48, Convener, and the internal consultations, we need to think through environmental health, noise and light. We need to think about transport planning. It's not terribly far from housing. There's housing just across the road in the Perth North Ward, and housing in associated farm buildings in the near vicinity. So that's important. I think under the key issues which the application will need to be addressed, the visual impact and landscape is important. Again, this is a very well used core path area. In the lockdown, the main lockdown period, convener, this was like a motorway with folk out walking, and that was great. But so the visual impact, the landscape, and the scale and the design and the layout are important, as indeed I think of the relationship to nearby land uses, because at Glendevon Farm there's caravans and there's, I say, Noah's Ark as well, and that relates back to the noise and light issues. Sure. So transport implications both during the construction phase, and I don't know what transport implications there will be. There'll be servicing of the battery storage. That's intermittent. There'll be a need to get in for inspections, etc. And I wonder about light pollution as well, because the area might need to be secured, and quite heavily secured. I don't know if that will involve lighting at night. And I think the additional statements which will be required under paragraph 18, particularly transport statement and assessment, and the landscape visual impact assessment, as I've referred to earlier, and a habitat survey, because it's an area of considerable habitat interest at the moment. The whole area is despite being just beside the bypass, is quite rural in its overall aspect, and there's certainly a lot of vegetation around, and if there's a lot of vegetation around, there's bound to be a lot of birds and animals around as well. I'm sorry to go on at length about these, but I think that they're really important that the planners get a lot of information to bring to us on that matter. These matters.
Okay. Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I'm sure they've taken note of all of that. Councillor James, you have a comment that you would like officers to take away.
Thanks very much, convener. Apologies that somebody's just knocked on the door, so the dogs are going mad. Okay. And I think Councillor Wilson has picked up pretty much every point I was thinking of, but I think given the nature of what's going there, or you know, battery storage, human factors, as in, you know, the interaction with people, paying particular, you know, the security of the site, if you like, and also noise pollution, given where it is. I'd like to, you know, things put in place to quantify those. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. Do we have any further comments for officers? I think between the three councillors, I think we've raised pretty much a lot of points that we would like to be looked at. As everybody is well aware, I think this is one of the most important parts of the whole planning process. So now is the time to raise any issues that you want given specific focus to. No, then in that case, thank you very much indeed. We will move on to the next item, sorry, which is another PAN, which is in Blairgowrie. It's the erection of 109 dwelling houses, garages and associated works. It's change of house types and revised design for plots 1 to 80 and 88 to 117, associated with planning permission of 1700961. It's an amendment at land southwest of Maple Place in Blairgowrie. Again, I'm opening up for comments for officers to look specifically at with this application. Councillor Braun, your comments, please.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Obviously, this came up some time ago with a previous developer. One of the worries of local residents was traffic on Elm Drive, and that particular part of the drive is now subject of a potential school exclusion zone for mornings and afternoons. So my point was, and I'm not sure if it's a planning or more of a legal thing, is that perhaps we could encourage the developer to look at opening up the access to Hazelwood Road, which is blocked by a ransom strip. which was a problem previously, and perhaps there could be some encouragement for that. That was my first point. The second thing is to do with regard to affordable housing. The previous developer had fulfilled their commitment to affordable housing when they completed the Blackthorn development, which is on the other side of Elm Drive, opposite this side. And I'm just wondering now with the new developer whether they must now commit themselves to 25% of the property to affordable housing. I think perhaps that should be clarified. Does the commitment to affordable housing go with the site, or does it go with the developer? Because in my calculation, 27 houses on this site should be put over for affordable housing. So that's another point to clarify for officers. And the third thing was, very quickly, and again, it's a similar situation. The previous developer had committed to building a lay-by for parking along Elm Drive on the opposite side of the road, and whether that commitment is still standing or not. So that was my 3 points there. Thank you, Convener. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Braun. Councillor Wilson, your comments for this application, please.
I was going to agree to defer to both the local members, and we've heard from Councillor Braun, so I'll defer to Councillor Tom McEwen next. If you can bring me in later, please, Convener.
Certainly, Councillor Wilson. Yes, absolutely. Councillor McEwen, your comments for officers to look at as this goes through the application process.
Thank you very much. And of course, I mirror everything that Councillor Braun has said, and these are discussions that we've all had before and in the ward many a time. The other thing in the area that's been noted and missing, and we were hoping this development was going to bring, was actually a play park. You know, we have issues in Blackthorn Place with children needing things to do, and play parks, etc., were things that were discussed and looked at with the previous developer. I'd also like to see continuation of an extension to the Ardblair Trail in Blairgowrie for cycling and walking through the area through Hazelwood Road. Joining up, Councillor Braun mentioned the road access, but also think that cycling through this area, and even cycling access down to Golf Course Roads in the future, is something that could possibly look at for the site to create that active walking and exercise, dog walking type utilisation of the area for the wider public in the area. And obviously the access to what's on the map on our things just saying playing field, which is Piggy Lane. You know, the road down to there at this moment in time is pretty higgledy-piggledy, so it'd be good to have a decent access road down there again for multi-use with the cyclists as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. I would want to support the comments made by the two local members. They've got much more intimate knowledge of the site, so my comments are a wee bit more generalised. I think in terms of internal consultations, what's particularly important, these are on 59, Convener, page 59, community green space, and that's been referenced by some of the comments from local members. Structures and flooding, I think we're getting in an area of layer which is important, and obviously transport planning. These things have been referred to in a bit more detail, but I have no apology for reiterating them. And when we get on to key considerations, para 27 on page 60, scale, design and layout, I think it's particularly important. About this is a key area, and it's a lovely bit of layout, and I think it needs to be thought through carefully. Open space provision and management has been referred to already, and the relationship to neighbouring land uses is particularly important, because there's a tension here in the boundaries of Rosemount, etc. What remains green and what's approved for development. So I think it's particularly important to relate that to neighbouring land uses, and the impacts of construction and operational noise. I think will be important. And again, just to emphasise the points that local members have made about transport implications. And flood risk and drainage assessment, and I think under 28, I don't want to repeat them all, but transport, flood risk and landscape are important as well in terms of additional statements in an EIA report or its equivalent.
Well done. Okay, thank you. Councillor Barnacle, you have a comment for officers to take for the application as it goes through its process.
Yeah, it is a comment, but it's also a question, convener, because on the map attached to the report, where it shows the site, it's got the word cemetery there. Is there a cemetery adjacent to the site? That picks up on Councillor Wilson's point about neighbouring land uses. Is that what you were meaning, Willie?
One of the points, yes.
Okay, as long as that's looked at, that's fine.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, do we have any further comments on this? No, then committee, thank you very much indeed. That's, as I've said many times, I do believe that the pre-application point is the starting point of the application process. It allows the locals to highlight what it is they're concerned about. It allows the local councillors to do the same. It's a very important part, so I really appreciate the councillors there taking the time to actually come forward with some points. I think it's very important, so thank you for that. And I'm not going to detain you any longer. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Thank you very much for the officers' time and for anyone listening. I hope that was reasonably smooth and we got out of it. So thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.